crack on anyway, because it is 4 o'clock, and it's a Thursday. Craig, yes, thank you, Craig. He started the recording of this. So we are recording this session, and so if you don't want to be recorded, then turn your camera off. Now, we're joined today by Annette and Michelle from SQA, I believe. Could you introduce yourselves, please?
Hi everyone, my name's Annette Falser and I work in the qualifications policy team with with emphasis on assessment arrangements and making reasonable adjustments. Michelle?
Hi everybody, my name is Michelle Cunningham. I work alongside Annette as the policy and research analyst, focused on equalities like Annette, just on assessment arrangements. But I'll let Annette answer most of the questions as much as possible.
Great, very much. Thanks very much for joining us. So this is billed as a conversation, and so I think it's a conversation between people from SQA, because and ourselves, and of course people in schools. And the focus of it is using Chromebooks for assessment arrangements. So it's come about because we've been having lots of questions and discussions with practitioners in schools about using technology in assessment arrangements, first of all, in general. So we ran a session on Monday, which gave a kind of more of an overview, and had a bit of a focus on Windows, using Windows devices. Then yesterday we did the same thing, but we had a focus on iPads, and so today the purpose of the thing is to get people together and share experiences and identify actions that need to be taken collectively, because the assessment arrangements obviously is a policy from SQA, so there may be things that require policy decisions, but the implementation of assessment arrangements with regard to technology is obviously done by schools and local authorities. And we think that there are some things that have to be done by schools and local authorities. And then we're using Chromebooks, and they have got particular characteristics. And so there may be things that software suppliers or app developers may need to do in order to enable this all to happen. Now, in the past few sessions, I've kicked it off with a PowerPoint show, I'm sorry to say, and then I've done some demonstration. Now for this particular one, and throughout the session, I'm hoping that people will contribute things to the chat pane. There's probably too many of us to have a kind of open-ended discussion with people turning on microphones, but I think today we'll try and give more time for people to talk and discuss. So with that in mind, I'm not going to do any demonstrations of things on a Chromebook. I'm just going to show you some screenshots, because that's probably a more efficient use of our time. So as I say, thanks very much indeed for joining us. And please pop questions and answers into the chat pane, and Craig and Shirley, my colleagues, and also I guess Annette and Michelle will respond appropriately. And I hope that this is going to be useful for you. Now, can people see a big slide on screen?
Yeah, nice and clear, Paul.
Jolly good. And you can hear me okay today?
You broke up a bit earlier on, but so far so good.
All right, okay. Good road. Yesterday, at various points, the audio just seemed to disappear. I suspect Reflector, which is what we use to share the screen, and so that's one of the reasons why I've not decided to do that for today's discussion. So a couple of things, a bit of background. As you probably know, we've been working with SQA on digital question papers since 2005. And initially, we were the people that researched and investigated and developed the digital question papers, which SQA have been offering as an assessment arrangement since 2008. So about 10 years later, SQA commissioned us to do an investigation into the use of Chromebooks. And it actually took longer than I expected, because it turned out to be not nearly as simple as expected. And the report was published in March 2020, just before lockdown, of course. So there is a clickable link there, and if you're interested, you could go and take a look at it. It's quite technical, but some of what we're going to be covering today is the detail is contained in that report. So you know, if you're wanting to follow up any of the technical detail, then that's the place to go. Most of it still seems to be valid, actually, because I've spent the past week or so checking everything, and not much seems to have changed since then. The second report, or piece of evidence, if you like, that I might direct you to, is a report that I did last August for SQA, and it was looking at the effect of COVID and the reaction to it on assessment arrangements during and what that meant for following the COVID pandemic. And it was modified for more public consumption because we felt it might be helpful for everybody involved, and that was published and it's available on the Call Scotland website. And again, those are clickable links that you can follow. We will send you a list of all these links after today's session, and we will also send you a link to where you can download the PowerPoint shows. So, of course, what's happened over COVID is that we've seen, I don't know, significant increase in the use of digital technology for learning, probably fair to say. And also an increase in the number of devices, personal devices, that learners have been given and provided with. Another thing that's happened over the past few years, of course, is that 10 years ago it was all Windows, but now we've got iPads and Chromebooks being provided for learners and used in schools across Scotland. So one of the investigations that we've been doing is just speaking to local authorities to try and get a picture of what's currently being used across the different Scottish local authorities. And it's probably fair to say that Windows machines are still used in many local authorities. But what's also happening is that we have one-to-one programmes. And so in the case of Chromebooks, that's Aberdeen, Highland, Stirling, and Midlothian, I believe, from what I've been told. And then we have other local authorities where they have large stocks of Chromebooks, not necessarily for a one-to-one scenario, like West Dunbartonshire or East Lothian come to mind particularly. And then other local authorities are going for iPads in a big way. One-to-one programmes in Glasgow first, and then Scottish Borders, now Edinburgh, and also Falkirk, and some schools in Perth and Kinross. And with iPads as well, there's some local authorities, many local authorities provide iPads for learners who've got particular additional support needs. So the picture is very mixed, and I think what had been going to happen anyway has accelerated faster as a result of the COVID pandemic. And of course, we've got the Scottish Government promising to ensure that every learner in the country has a personal device by the end of this Parliament, which I believe is 2026. So the technology landscape has changed quite considerably. Now, where does that leave us with assessment arrangements? Well, one of the conclusions that we came to when we were speaking to people in local authorities and schools last year was that the digital question papers that were provided by SQA as the secure papers for last year did not appear to be commonly used by candidates who had iPads or Chromebooks. And there's a combination of technical, administrative and policy-related factors for that, which we're going to talk about today. There's some really basic, simple things, which is that the digital answer books in Chrome don't work very well in Word format, don't work very well on Google Docs. And we've also found that the PDFs that are provided, it's fair to say that the user experience varies depending on which device you've got, and that's not necessarily in a good way. Now, one of the big things that's come out is that the modern devices, of course, have got many built-in support tools like spell check, autocorrect, word prediction, and particularly tools like Google voice typing, or just voice typing, which is available in the Chromebook. And so we need to collectively, I think, develop policies that reflect those modern tools. And with the PDFs themselves, then they frankly don't seem to work too well on Chromebooks. I think that's the conclusion I've come to, but it'll be welcome, you know, if you've got comments on that. We want to hear about it. So that's kind of setting the scene. SQA assessment arrangements and technology, digital question papers, digital answer booklets. It's all just the scenarios have just changed rapidly over the past few years, and it's been also impacted by COVID. So let's think about what assessment arrangements are, and then we'll think about the Chromebook situation particularly. So just a wee reminder of assessment arrangements. As we know, the purpose is to provide disabled candidates with an equal opportunity to demonstrate attainment. There are 4 principles that SQA adhere to when developing the policy on assessment arrangements. So the arrangements are intended to enable candidates to demonstrate, but not to compensate for lack of attainment. They must not compromise the integrity of the qualification. They must be tailored to meet the candidate's individual needs, and they should reflect as far as possible the candidate's normal way of learning and producing work. And of course, in a context where every student in the local authority in a secondary school is being provided with a Chromebook, as in, say, Aberdeen or Highland, then the candidate's normal way of producing work may well be to use a Chromebook. And so the reasonable expectation is that you might want to use that for an examination. I mean, for me, the biggest challenge in terms of management of the situation is not necessarily for candidates who require assessment arrangements. It's for every candidate, because if every candidate has got a Chromebook and is using Google Docs or whatever for regular classroom activity, then every candidate is likely to be quite interested in using the Chromebook in an examination, which of course at the present time is permitted under the SQA policy, not the AA policy, the ICT policy, but the management of that, of this possible scenario is, you know, speaking to schools, it's a big one, isn't it? How do you do that? So I'm watching the chat pane. I don't see anybody disagreeing or agreeing, but if you do, pop them in. I might be talking nonsense, and if so, I'd like to know about it. But also, if any of this is resonating with you, then please say. Now, a significant aspect with the whole situation is the security, which obviously we need to have because we need to maintain the integrity of the qualification. The latest document I had access to personally contained these words. So we have no internet or network connections other than a restricted exam network. Let's think about that. No use of spell check or other support tools unless they're requested and approved as an assessment arrangement. We don't want access to thesaurus or any other tools that might support the student in ways which would undermine the integrity of the assessment. No other candidate's performance may be disturbed, and no extra invigilation costs. The spell check may only be used where it's been approved, and this also applies to, I believe, to facilities like autocorrect, auto-capitalization, predictive text, and dictation or Google voice typing. And thesaurus and any tools to look up and define or get dictionary definitions are not permitted. So that's the kind of setup for the devices. Now, there are 3 types of scenarios that I think it's helpful to consider when we're thinking about Chromebooks and assessment arrangement. So the first scenario is where a candidate is using a question paper, a paper question paper, and simply wanting to type up answers using technology. And of course, this is not only learners with assessment arrangements that this could be available to, it could be any candidate. The spell check, as we discussed, is permitted for learners who have difficulties with spelling and for whom the assessment arrangement has been requested. And to help us, SQA provide digital answer booklets in Word and PDF format, which you can download from the SQA website. The use of these is not mandatory, but it's helpful if they work, because it means that the printed result can be scanned and processed more easily by SQA. If you're using a question paper, a student can request, or a school can request, the use of SQA to provide coloured papers, enlarged papers or adapted papers, and students themselves can use different tools to access the question paper. So that's our first scenario. The second scenario is where a student wants to use a digital version of the paper, a question-only version. That's where you can't type or write your answers in. And you might want to read the paper using your Chromebook and make it bigger, or possibly change the colours, or use text-to-speech to read it. And then your answers would be either typed up on the Chromebook or handwritten in unusual circumstances. And our third scenario is where we have question and answer papers from SQA. So these are PDFs, and where the candidate would normally handwrite on the paper, we have an answer box, and the student can type in to the answer box. And hopefully you can also make it bigger, change the background and the foreground colours for candidates that might have a preference for that, use text-to-speech to read the questions, and then use things like dictation or spell check or word prediction to type your answers in. So that's kind of the specification of what we want for what we want to do. We want to read papers, we want to change the appearance, navigate around them, use text-to-speech, and if it's got question and answers, we want to be able to type or dictate our answers in. And all of these need to be managed in such a way that different students with different requirements for different examinations can be set up. So you need to be able to configure your Chromebooks, to turn the spell check off for some, turn it on for others, distribute papers to students, get them printed out, collect them. And so the management of the whole situation, as we know, as you know, is quite considerable when you're doing it on a big scale. And so, yeah, you need to get the question papers onto the Chromebooks. You need to print the results. You need to read the students be able to read the questions. You need to adhere to the security, and then there's all the things about the spell check and other facilities. And so it's quite a big challenge. And so these are the kind of basic questions to begin with. And folks said yesterday, how do we set up exam accounts for iPads? In this case, we're thinking about Chromebooks. And how can we configure our Chromebooks to disable or enable the various support tools, the spell check, etc.? How can we distribute the files onto the Chromebooks? And really basic questions, how can pupils print? And actually, from the conversations that I've had with people that are using Chromebooks, these questions are actually quite hard to answer. It's not at all straightforward. Now, I'd really like some comments here in the chat. Has anybody tried to configure? Okay, so Paul Graham is suggesting we could use exam organisational units, is what OU stands for, Google Admin. Move student accounts in and out on that exam day. Excellent. well, we should follow that up with more, Paul. Would you like to expand on that? Put your microphone on and tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure, yeah. The idea I would have would be to have a list of each pupil that was going into an exam on a day and have specific OUs for the different requirements. You know, you looked at people that were using Chromebooks just for reading the papers, down to people that had spell checkers and everything else. I don't know whether all that is doable in an OU, but for me, I think the easiest thing would be to move the pupil accounts into that OU for the exam day, provided the OU can give us the functionality we need, and then move them back out, and then we don't need to set up extra accounts.
Right. Okay. Would you be able to say where you're coming from? Which local authority?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I'm an assistant specialist at Fife.
Right.
We've got a one-to-one pilot going on at the moment where we're using Chromebooks and iPads.
Great. Okay. That's fantastic. I've got a few slides, just a wee bit more about that. So but honestly, I mean, Carol's saying what's an OU? It's an organizational unit, and it's a way of organizing Chromebooks, I believe. And Andy Robb's also got something to say. Andy, would you like to contribute here?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. We had a chat with yourself back earlier on. I think it was earlier on this year. We were going down the road of trying to use Chromebooks in a kiosk mode, which would only allow a certain amount of applications. We were locking all the sites down by using our internet blockers filtering software. We even managed to get a third-party tool that would restrict access to things like spell checker. One of the problems we saw, I mean, Chromebooks by their very nature are always connected to the internet. If you were using a Google Doc, you could type Albert Einstein into a Google Doc, select that text, right-click on it, and it allows you to search for Albert Einstein. Now, you can lock that all down so that they can't actually do a proper search, but the previews appear on the right-hand side. So we managed to lock those sort of things down as well. But sure, as we're not allowed to use internet access, as said by the SQA guidance. So a Chromebook needs internet access to work. Now, if you look at the things, just a very simple thing like, right, getting an exam paper onto a Chromebook. How do we do that? Because that has to be in the cloud. That's on a Google Drive, which is in the cloud, which is in the cloud space. What are the security requirements around us having to store a file in Google Drive? So there's all these sort of things have to be trying and worked out. And we shelved it and said, look, we can't do Chromebooks again this year. We were hoping we might be able to, but we've reverted back to using Windows devices again, which is not ideal because the children are using Chromebooks in their day-to-day life. It's what they're used to using. And then when they come to an exam situation, they're plonked in front of a Windows device instead, and it's slightly different. Okay, it's similar, but it is different from what they're used to using. So it can throw them off as well. Does that help, Paul?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks very much. And both Rory and Robert Quigley have got suggestions here. That's interesting. Okay, so we've got people in Fife investigating it, but also some experience, I think, in Highland about trying to configure Chromebooks for assessments. And a suggestion from Robert here that we might need to think about how we view the current technical setup with question papers. I think that's probably, that's almost certainly what we're going to conclude at the end of the session. Spoiler alert. Now, you know, if you go along, you can find information about using Chromebooks for assessments, because clearly this isn't something that is confined to Scotland. And so Chromebooks are used quite heavily in North America in particular, and everywhere else. And so apparently, when set up properly, Chromebooks can meet educational testing standards and are a secure platform. Ta-da! Problem solved. Hey, what are we all worrying about? And so if you follow this a bit clearer, there are 3 techniques that Google suggest. And the first one is setting up a kiosk, where I think Andy mentioned that, looking at that. Now, the first thing, you need to access to the Google admin console here. And somebody, I think Val Watt said in the chat, what about if you don't have your own Google Kit tenancy? Exactly. And so you need to have an administrator account to get onto this. And as far as I understand it, not all the authorities that have got Chromebooks have access to either the Google admin console or indeed even, you know, their own Google tenancy. To create this app requires coding, programming, scripting, whatever you want to call it. And the other problem for us, I think, is that you're locked into doing one thing. And we don't think that any additional extensions or apps that you might be needing to use to provide accessibility, like Read&Write, would actually work. I mean, we're not terribly sure about that, but we think that could be a problem. Option 2 that Google suggests is the provider creates a separate domain and creates student accounts. Yeah. For the school IT, it still needs set up, we understand, with the Google admin console, which, you know, at this moment in time, we don't think is going to be a goer for the whole of Scotland, because some people don't. But we think this might, or when we looked at it, we thought this might offer most of the functionality, except that we couldn't see if there was an easy way to enable and disable spell check on the device itself. Now that may have changed, because we haven't investigated this in detail over, you know, since actually for 2 years, so it may have changed. Third scenario is the school sets up the assessment with managed guest sessions on devices. So this is again requires the admin console, and according to Google anyway, we can have multiple apps, windows and extensions. And so that's quite important for us, because you might want to be using a PDF viewer to view your question paper and say Google Docs to type up your answers, provided you can configure Google Docs to turn off the spell check and etc. 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 So the kind of devil is in the detail here, and although, yeah, it may be possible, but I don't know, I kind of get the impression from having conversations with people, and it'd be fantastic if people were able to say, no, I've solved it. But, you know, in Highland, they've looked at it, and we don't seem to have a solution. So one possibility to share with you is to consider one of the commercial exam providers. Now, I suppose I share these. None of them provide us with what we want, as far as I'm aware, but I suppose they illustrate what could be possible, because exam.net has got an app, and the app will have been developed, you know, using the Google assessment security tools, and so I suppose it shows that something might be possible. So exam.net is one, and I've not done a systematic survey of everything that's available. There's bound to be more. So this is just by way of example. So it's a product, I think it's Danish company. It allows you to upload a PDF as a question paper. The kind of killer, the deal breaker for, if you like, for us, is that all you can do is view the PDF. You can't change the colors, you can make it bigger or smaller, but you can't use text to speech. And so it might be good for some candidates, but as a general purpose solution, I don't think it's any use to us. I did contact them and said, you know, this is a fantastic looking product. You can get free trials. But it needs to be able to have text-to-speech and accessibility of the PDF. Are you planning to add it? They said no. But it might be technically possible. And they provide accessibility options for the writing space. So you might find this kind of thing would be helpful for our scenarios 1 or 2, maybe. No, sorry, scenarios 1, where you just want to type things up, because it's got text-to-speech and it's got a spell check that you can disable or enable. This is a kind of hard to see, I know, but on the left-hand side we've got the PDF, and on the right-hand side we've got the writing space, which is just a plain word processor. ChromEx is another one. So its build is being specifically tailored for Google. You can get a free trial for up to 10 students, so it might be worth a look. We believe that question papers, PDFs, can be uploaded. We don't know about the accessibility of them. There are some tools available in the area where you write your answers, and so that includes text-to-speech and speech-to-text and spell check, and these can be enabled or disabled as required. So that looks quite interesting. And here's an example. I mean, you can't see it, I know it's too wee, but on the right-hand side we've got instructions, on the left-hand side we've got the candidate's writing space. So that might be worth a look. And then DigiExam is another one. We believe that PDFs can be linked, so not uploaded, linked to, and external tools can be permitted. So if you had an online PDF viewer that provided the accessibility and the functionality that you wanted, then maybe that could work. And the writing space, again, lets you turn things on or off as required. And then finally, we've got Surpass. It's a British company, and they already have a relationship with SQA because they provide the platform for Solar, and they have the contract with AlphaPlus to provide the new Scottish National Standardised Assessments from August this year. Now, I don't know, I'm afraid, the technical capability here, but I guess it's another option. However, as Andy said, the kind of constant factor here is the internet. It can't be done without the internet. So that needs to change first. And and then we can do something about it, maybe. Now, I mean, it's been such a hard time for everybody over the past 2 years that, I think everyone's just trying to get from one day to the next day. But, let's assume that the internet policy does get changed. And then, we've still got the technical challenge of working out how to do it on the assumption that we're still going to be using PDFs this time next year, which I think is probably likely. So I don't know. Yeah, there's jobs to be done. So let's just think about some of the detail. Now, what's different now, of course, compared with, say, a few years ago, is that Chromebooks have got facilities built into the device itself. Oh yeah, Val, data protection, absolutely. No, I think that's dead relevant, because any apps or extensions that we might want to be using to access digital question papers will only appear if they've undergone a data protection impact assessment. And we know that in Glasgow and Edinburgh and Scottish borders, the school staff apparently can't download Claro PDF or PDF Expert, which is really the best apps for using digital question papers, because they're not on the self-service system. And that's probably because they've not been DPIA'd. And so, we have got a ridiculous situation at this moment in time where learners are being provided with iPads, on a massive scale, one-to-one, and Chromebooks, and yet next month we're not able to use them for exams for a combination of reasons. It's really not good. Yeah, so Chromebooks and exams, you need to be able to turn off these various tools that aren't necessarily permitted. But it gets more complicated because sometimes you get support tools built into the app or the facility that you're using. And so Google Docs is obviously the classic one, because you can turn off your spell check on the Chromebook, but the Google Docs spell checker still works. Now, Andy, I think Andy Robb and Robert Quigley and Rory Ross had come across SafeDocs, which is an extension that lets you control what Google Docs can use. But I think even SafeDocs, you know, it was one element. It is one element of the overall picture, but it's not adequate to provide us with a working solution. And I think we still require access to the internet in order for it to work. It's a paid for extension, Andy says. Yep, thank you. So really, that's what we're thinking about here. What can we do now? And I've got a few more things to say before we kind of finish off. But really, that's what we're thinking of. What can we collectively do? Because I think in the report that I provided to SQA, this is not. There's changes that we think need to be made in terms of policy, but there's also technical development. And the policy, any policy, has got to reflect what's actually possible in schools, and so it's got to be a co-production, development between SQA and schools, because otherwise we'll end up with a policy that doesn't work, is not able to be implemented, and so SQA need help and advice to come up with something that's going to work. So we have a survey here, and it's really simple. I just really encourage you to complete it, because what I'm talking about is based on a small number of conversations that I've had with practitioners across the country, and I've got no idea. Somebody somewhere might have cracked it, but I don't think so. Or at least if they have, we've not found it so far. So if you'd like to complete the survey, it would at least give us a bigger picture of what's going on. So let's just think of some of the basics. So we're thinking about using ICT in a question paper, and all you want to do is type up your exams. So we just need security and configuration of the Chromebook, and we need a text editor. But as discussed, I think, yes, exactly. Yes, Graham's pointing out that there's subjects that require more than just typing. Exactly, yes.
Is it maybe worth? Oh, sorry, Paul.
Sure, carry on.
Terrible feedback. I think the paper, as we used to call it, is the digital question papers was a response to being able to access that. But I think Graham is absolutely right. It's not digital assessment, and it's not, it's just a way of accessing the paper through technology. So I think, and I think somebody else said earlier about getting, a proper platform for proper digital learning and assessment, and that's going to have to be something that the new bodies, because I think there's going to be 3 or 4 of them, will have to embrace and have to take forward. But is there anything we can do? SQA is here up until 2024, so we might not be able to start anything on such a grand scale. But are there, as Paul said, what can we do? What can we change? Things that we have power over to make things more straightforward. I met with Paul, and I don't want to say her name. I don't know if Elaine's here today. And I couldn't believe just how complicated it was for her to use iPads, and hours and hours, days and days of her time trying to manage this process. So we are really keen to try and help or streamline or make changes where we possibly can. So please be as honest as you can. I'm sure you will be. If that's okay to say, Paul.
No, absolutely. I think that's right, and it's also I think the other reason for having these conversations is to inform any future developments by SQA.
Absolutely.
Or whatever replaces the SQA.
Yeah.
Because
definitely.
In my experience, we can't assume that accessibility is thought about.
No.
And the current situation that we have in Scotland demonstrates that you also can't assume that when decisions are taken about purchasing educational technology, assessments are taken into account. Because otherwise we wouldn't have a situation where we've got huge numbers of devices being purchased and nobody and they can't be used in an exam.
Absolutely.
How did that happen?
I know.
So yes, yeah. I mean, so we know it's a big problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll just finish off with the few things, and then we could, if anybody's got any good suggestions, we can. I've got some ideas of what we might do, and see what you think. So you can also get your answer booklets in PDF, and of course you can use some apps, extensions to open up the PDF and type them in. But we've not really found any which do everything that you need to do, frankly. Scenario 2, question over DQP, and of course the challenge for some of the security questions is that, and the reason why kiosk mode doesn't work with this is because you need two things happening at the same time. So question paper at the top being read with Read&Write, for example, or could be other tools, and then Google Docs at the bottom. And so none of this is technically that hard until you add on the complexities of no internet or restricted internet, turning off spell check on the device, turning off spell check on Google Docs, etc., etc., etc. And when you want text to speech, or you want to use, it's the complexity of the whole affair, and the need to have so many different situations on, quite a large scale, where you've got everybody sitting National 5 English all at the same time. So there are some PDF readers that we researched and tested in that report. And if you just want to read a PDF, the Chrome PDF viewer, Kami, and TextHelp or Orbit Note is their new version of the product. They're quite good. You can always get Android apps, Foxit and Adobe Acrobat, and they're all right as well. But all of them have got limitations in what you can do, and none of them provide us with the same functionality that you have on Adobe Reader for nothing on a PC. And I think that's one of the reasons why we don't have a collective solution yet. Another product called DocsPlus. So this is a paid product, and it comes from Crick Software, and it's available for iPad and Windows, and it's got an exam mode. So it's got loads of nice tools for supporting reading and writing. It's not, as Graham said, it's not fantastic. In fact, it's no use at all if you're wanting to do some drawing. But you can interact with the question paper, and you can use it to write. But it is a paid product. Question and answer digital question papers. So here's us using the Chrome PDF viewer to read out some text with the built-in Chrome text-to-speech. Here's Kami. It's available free or as a paid app, and it's quite nice. It's probably about the closest that we can get, I think. It has got some limitations though, which is that when you type in, you get a weird experience with answer boxes where they're transparent for reasons unknown, and so you can see the handwriting guides underneath. But CAMI is worth a look. Read and Write. Again, you can read the question paper. It's got a good text reader. It costs money, of course. And one of the limitations with it is that you can't type into answer boxes. Now, what you can do is click on top and then type in. But it does mean that the candidate, or dictate, and it's got lots of support tools, but it does mean that the candidate got to make sure that that answer box is in the correct place. And I think the other problem we found with Read and Write is one of the things that we think is crucial for anything like this is automatic saving. If the thing doesn't automatically save and the internet goes down, then it's obviously a calamity. And I think when we tested it, it didn't have automatic save. So that's it for me. And so I'm going to stop sharing this and throw the floor open to anybody else. I've not been watching the chat, so Craig or Annette, is there anything that's come up that...
Can I just say to, sorry, trying to scroll up. Rory, please don't worry about causing offence. We have very thick skin, but also we have had conversations with GCQ, which is the body for assessment arrangements down south, and we are trying to build up relationships with other awarding bodies and trying to find out how they go about this as well. So we are looking outwards and not just looking inwards, and we'll hopefully start some conversations that way as well.
I mean, some of the other exam boards have taken a decision that internet access can be allowed for the online dictation tools like Microsoft Dictate or Siri.
Yes.
Whether